Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here today to really dig into a stack of sources you've provided, covering some fascinating moves in tech, business, and innovation.
Yeah, our job is to sort of unpack all this material, connect the dots between, say, telecom infrastructure and AI hardware, and pull out the insights that, really matter.
Exactly. We want to help you understand what's going on beneath the headlines, find those maybe surprising connections you might have missed. Think of it as your shortcut.
Right. We've got stuff on AT&T's fiber ambitions, Anthropic's latest AI models, OpenAI's hardware plays, digital finance twists, even a digital health IPO. Lots to cover.
Let's dive right in then. First up, AT&T. They're making a big move, acquiring Lumen's consumer fiber operations. What's the main driver here, according to the sources?
Well, it really boils down to a core belief. Data demand isn't slowing down, especially upstream traffic, people uploading more, doing more complex things.
And they see fiber as the answer.
Absolutely. The sources quote them saying there's basically no better technology out there for Americans than fiber. They feel they have a lead, and this deal helps them, accelerate that lead, press the advantage.
So it's less about building it all themselves and more about buying speed, like acquiring market presence faster.
Precisely. The sources actually say this deal buys them a little bit over a year's worth of build. It's a strategic shortcut to expand their footprint much more quickly than organic building alone.
Okay, and what's the plan once they have these Lumen operations? Just more lines, or is there a bigger play?
Oh, there's definitely a bigger play. It's about integration, bringing AT&T's scale, their marketing muscle, their operational know-how to drive up penetration, get more customers onto those lines, and boost revenue.
Makes sense.
And here's a really key part. The sources highlight these are markets where AT&T feels they're currently under a share in wireless.
Ah, the bundle.
Exactly. They've had real success bundling fiber and wireless. Something like 40% of their fiber customers also take AT&T wireless. So the expectation is this deal will start driving some wireless growth, too. It feeds the whole ecosystem.
That's a smart angle, leveraging the fiber acquisition to boost another core business. What about the money side? Partnerships.
Yeah, infrastructure investment is huge here. They've done this before, right? The Gigapower joint venture with BlackRock is mentioned.
Right.
So for this Lumen deal, they're looking to bring in another equity partner structured in a similar way. BlackRock might be interested, the sources say, but lots of infrastructure investors like these kinds of deals. Stable, long-term assets.
And AT&T positions itself as a good partner for these investors.
Yeah, because they can build fast and, crucially, get customers signed up. They deliver the subscribers. The actual partner is still to be determined, pending regulatory stuff, but the model is clear.
So what does AT&T argue this means for, regular people?
They're for communities. Their main point is competition. They argue this deal heats up broadband competition, which is vital so Americans get great infrastructure. They're very bullish on fiber being better than anything that cable has, especially with symmetrical speeds. Uploads matter now.
And they're committing to build more, too.
Yep, planning to nearly double their fiber footprint by 2030, investing in places like Denver, Seattle, Minneapolis. That means local construction jobs, technician jobs. They frame it as a great thing for communities, and for the U.S., building world-class fiber infrastructure. Ready for the future, the air revolution, as they put it.
What about the broader telecom market? Does this signal more M&A coming?
AT&T seems to think so. The sources indicate they expect a layer of consolidation over the next decade. This Lumen deal was seen as a pretty straightforward make-buy decision for them to accelerate their footprint.
So maybe not many more deals this big available, but consolidation is the trend.
That seems to be their read. They're not closed-minded, but this was a significant opportunity they jumped on.
And finally, on AT&T, there was mention of government involvement, BEAD funding.
Right. The CEO mentioned talking with the administration. They see investment stimulus as good, but they do raise a question about the big $46 billion BEAD subsidy program.
What's the issue?
Well, their point, according to the sources, is that since that money was earmarked, private industry has actually already connected about half the households that were initially considered unserved. The gap shrank from maybe 15 million to 7.5 million homes.
So the landscape changed while the policy was being set up.
Kind of. So they're suggesting maybe we should rethink how that money is spent for the really expensive, hard-to-reach places left. Is fiber always the answer, or could satellite technology be more cost-effective for the taxpayer in some of those edge cases? It's a call for maybe a more tailored approach now.
Interesting perspective. Okay, let's completely switch gears. Artificial intelligence. Anthropic's new Claude models, Opus and Sonnet. What's the big deal here?
The main innovation they're highlighting, especially with Opus, is handling complex tasks, long-running tasks. This seems to address a real user frustration.
How so? What was the problem before?
Well, users started wanting AI to do more than just quick Q&A. They wanted help with things taking, tens of minutes to hours, coding projects, analyzing huge documents, that sort of thing.
Right.
But older models would tend to lose coherence. They'd forget what they were doing halfway through or get sidetracked. You'd have to stop, restart, guide them constantly. Opus is designed to stay on track for longer and even handle multiple things in parallel.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty fundamental improvement. How they pull that off? What's the tech secret sauce?
This is really fascinating. They've essentially given the model memory. The sources describe it as the model learning to write memory files, like little notes to itself, and also write to-do lists and update them over time.
So it can keep track of its own process, like taking notes.
Pretty much. And what's cool is they say it's transparent. Users can actually introspect, look at these memory files or to-do lists to see what the AI is planning or thinking.
Yeah.
That's pretty novel, helps understand what it's doing. One source even called seeing the AI write its to-do list quite endearing.
Huh, I bet. In Sonnet 4, you mentioned that one too.
Right, Sonnet 4 is more of a drop-in update for users of their previous model, 3.7. The goal was seamless transition. Same price, existing prompts should work with minimal tweaks, same speed and latency, just better performance. They want people using it on day one.
Who are they really building these for? Is it consumers, businesses?
The focus seems heavily weighted towards the enterprise. The examples given in the sources are telling. Using Opus for large, hard enterprise code-based problems, like a big Java migration project that might run for hours.
Okay.
Another one was internal knowledge work. Imagine pointing it at your company's Slack and Google Docs and asking it to synthesize information, find connections, generate novel insights.
Cutting through the internal info overload. That's appealing.
Definitely. They position it as a very useful thought partner, though they were quick to add it's not at the stage yet where it's going to be replacing the CPO, the Chief Product Officer. So humans are still needed.
Good to hear. For now, anyway. How do people get their hands on these?
They emphasize availability. Opus 4 and Sonnet 4 are generally available right away, both in the consumer Claude app and through the API for developers and businesses. They expect high demand, so there will be rate limits and capacity management, but they're out there.
And technically, do they optimize for specific hardware or clouds?
Yes, the focus mentioned was on chipsets like Bedrock, which runs on Google's specialized PTPUs and Google Cloud Vertex. That's where they've concentrated their optimization efforts initially. They could expand, but that's the starting point.
How do they stack up against competitors?
Benchmarks show they're state-of-the-art in certain areas, like software engineering tasks. But the sources also mention Anthropic is just as excited about the positive feedback from early users on daily use improvements, real-world performance matching the numbers.
And their coding tool, Cloud Code.
That's also becoming generally available. Apparently, there's a massive pipeline of demand, especially from businesses who tried it individually and now want it enterprise-wide. They focused on making it easy to integrate with existing enterprise accounts like Adobe Bedrock or Vertex and tools like GitHub Actions.
So making adoption smooth.
Right. They frame Cloud Code as their first virtual collaborator, something you can actually delegate work autonomously to. That's a pretty strong claim about its capability.
Okay, from AI software to AI hardware, or at least the ambition for it. This OpenAI and Jony Ive collaboration sounds huge. $6.5 billion in stock involved.
Yeah, this one definitely made waves. There was apparently a very slick promotional video filmed in Francis Ford Coppola's cafe, described as grand. They're not being subtle.
And the goal is equally grand, right? To build something that can replace the iPhone.
That's the reported aim. Hardware that could topple the iPhone as the leading device of choice when it comes to interacting with computing. Which, as the sources immediately note, is an incredibly difficult thing for even him, Jony Ive, to achieve. Understatement of the year, perhaps.
So is this OpenAI basically buying design talent they don't have? An acqui-hire?
That seems to be a big part of it, bringing in Ive and his team of other former Apple designers. A press release apparently said they're remaining independent, but yeah, it's about getting that world-class hardware design DNA that OpenAI, being primarily AI researchers, just doesn't have.
But why do they need hardware? People use ChatGPT on phones and websites now.
Well, the thinking outlined in the sources is that the current interaction model typing prompts into a website or app might become a lot less useful over time,
How so?
because companies like Google are already integrating AI directly into things like search. The fear is that AI becomes an embedded feature everywhere, and OpenAI needs its own primary platform, its own vector, so people interact directly with their AI.
Like Apple has devices, Google has search, Meta has social.
Exactly. They need their own front door. Hardware is one way to try and build that, though. As the sources say, it's a very good, albeit expensive way to bring on that expertise.
Any idea what kind of hardware they're thinking of? A phone? Something else?
The reporting mentioned in the sources suggests they want a range of devices, possibly by late 2026, but the form factor is unknown. Speculation leans towards maybe a third device, something beyond your phone and laptop.
A third device. We've seen others try new form factors, wearables and such, with pretty mixed results.
Absolutely. The sources make that exact point. Getting people to adopt another device is a big, big ask. They even reference the Humane iPin, calling it the chunky brooch, Alpha Humane,
Yeah.
which sort of captures the skepticism around some recent attempts.
Even with Joni Ive designing it.
Even with Ive. His design skills are legendary, but it's still asking a lot of people to get on board with a potentially new way of interacting with technology and carrying another gadget.
This must be raising eyebrows at Apple, Ive's old stomping ground.
You'd have to assume so. The sources bring up an Apple exec's comment from a legal filing suggesting we might not use iPhones in 10 years, though that was likely strategic positioning in a competition hearing.
Right. Context matters.
But the broader point made is that this OpenAI venture, at the very least, is highlighting the fact that Apple has been very much on the back foot since Joni Ive left nearly 6 years ago. There is a perception they lack a clear product visionary for the next big thing, and this move highlights that Apple has huge amounts of work to do in the AI hardware space.
And Apple and OpenAI currently have a relationship, right? ChatGPT runs on iPhones.
Exactly. It's an add-on service right now. Apple will have to think carefully about how they manage that relationship if OpenAI turns into a direct hardware competitor. Things could get awkward.
So the ultimate vision is AI not just as an app, but woven into the fabric of a device.
That seems to be the idea. Bringing AI, specifically ChatGPT, into an everyday device in a way that's going to be much more integrated, not something you consciously open an app for, but just they're part of how you use the device.
And beyond this AI challenge, Apple's facing other pressures too.
Yeah, the sources mention a negative political backdrop, including reported attacks from President Trump, plus ongoing scrutiny over its global manufacturing footprint. Add that to the AI competition and existing worries about growth if iPhone sales slow. It's a lot of stuff for Apple investors to be considering right now.
Okay, powering all this AI, the models, the potential hardware, requires massive infrastructure. Let's talk about OpenAI's Stargate project. What is that?
Stargate seems to be OpenAI's code name, or maybe public name now, for their initiative to build the absolutely enormous data center infrastructure needed for future AI. And it's going international.
Where are they building?
A major project highlighted in the sources is in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE. A huge data center cluster is planned there.
How huge are we talking?
The overall project is aiming for 5 gigawatts of power capacity over time. 5 gigawatts. That's described as an insane amount of power.
Put that in perspective for us.
Well, one source calculated that, based on 2022 figures for the UAE, 5 gigawatts could potentially consume 1/3 of the entire country's energy. OpenAI's specific piece of this is planned to be 1 gigawatt, with the first 200 megawatts coming online over the course of next year.
Wow. Just wow. Where does all that energy come from?
That's the billion-dollar question, or maybe trillion-dollar question. The sources indicate a belief that the UAE has a real plan and a real strategy to generate and supply this power over time. It really underscores a critical point. The intelligence age needs electrons energy. The two, energy and innovation, really move in concert.
And there's a geopolitical angle to this UAE project.
Yes, it's being framed as part of OpenAI for countries. The idea is that AI is almost like a nation-building technology now, similar to how electricity was generations ago. The goal stated is to build democratic AI rails around the world, leveraging the U.S. lead.
And the sources link this to politics.
They do. The reporting connects this project to President Trump's previous trip to the Middle East in UAE, describing it as part of a commercial diplomacy approach, building these AI rails while also aiming to bring investment back into the U.S. It's noted the administration was involved in trying to forge and facilitate all of this. We're just relaying how the sources presented this context.
Is it just the UAE, or are they looking elsewhere internationally?
They're definitely looking elsewhere. Asia is a focus, particularly historic U.S. allies like South Korea, Japan, Australia, Singapore. OpenAI's chief strategy officer has reportedly been traveling for talks, and apparently over 30 countries have reached out about this OpenAI for countries idea. So there's clearly great interest globally and imperative to gaining access to this technology.
What about building this kind of infrastructure back home in the U.S.?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The sources mention U.S. Stargate projects, too. An example given is a site in Abilene, Texas, planned to be over a gigawatt of energy, employing thousands.
So a domestic push as well.
Right. The underlying belief expressed is that the U.S. has a history of thinking big, acting big, and building big, and that there's a clear path to develop the needed infrastructure domestically. There are challenges, sure, but the sentiment is that in this global economic competition, infrastructure is destiny. Getting the energy and building the data centers is key to staying ahead. There seems to be a lot of support and, dare I say, even energy behind getting access to that energy.
That really paints a picture of the sheer scale involved.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift again. Technology meets finance, tokenization, crypto, and the regulatory scene.
Yeah, some interesting stuff happening here. Kraken, the exchange, is launching something called X stocks.
X stocks, what is it?
Essentially, it lets you trade tokenized versions of big U.S. tech stocks.
Yeah.
Apple, Nvidia, Tesla are mentioned. But here's the catch, highlighted in the sources. It's currently only for people outside the United States, Europe, Latin America, Asia specifically.
Tokenized stocks. What's the advantage over just buying regular shares?
The core benefit described is holding collateral that you can take with you 247. It's permissionless, meaning not locked inside one broker system, not a walled garden. The idea is it enables global liquidity, easier access for developers and capital outside the traditional financial plumbing.
So potentially faster, more accessible, more global.
That's the promise. But the huge question, obviously, is how soon this could be brought on shore into the U.S. That means getting regulatory green lights, especially from the SEC.
And the traditional players won't like that.
Probably not. The sources expect exchanges like NASDAQ to push back against this kind of innovation, seeing it as a direct challenge to their established monopoly or walled garden. Disruptive tech often faces resistance.
Now, the sources also touched on the politics surrounding crypto, mentioning President Trump. What's the take there?
It presents a couple of viewpoints. One perspective shared is that his engagement has been incredibly helpful for the momentum of the digital asset industry, opened up a lot of doors, and might influence future policy. But then there's the counterpoint, attributed to figures like Senators Warren and Schiff, who reportedly see things like Trump's dinner with crypto execs as potentially a so-called pay-to-play occurrence, raising flags about corruption and foreign influence, just reporting the different views described.
So how does the industry perspective, as presented in the sources, navigate that political friction?
The view shared seems to be to treat the political back and forth more as noise that can be segmented or walled off. The argument is it's not a reason to not move forward with this important legislation, which they feel is actually gaining more and more bipartisan support anyway.
So try to insulate the tech development from the political headlines.
That appears to be the strategy discussed. Move digital assets out of this kind of political noise so the underlying tech isn't derailed by partisan conflicts. Deal with conflicts transparently, sure, but create barricades around those conflicts so that it doesn't impact the movement forward, especially for keeping the U.S. competitive in this space. And the way to potentially do that, suggested in the sources, is to focus the conversation on tokenization itself, the technology, how it's blurring lines between TradFi and crypto trading, changing the fundamental architecture, things like near-instant settlement compared to slow systems like SWIFT, the potential of stablecoins for payments. Frame it around those technological benefits, and it becomes harder to politicize, allowing the industry to move a lot further, a lot faster.
Interesting strategy. Okay, one more major topic shift. Digital health. Hinge Health just had its IPO. What's the story?
Right. Hinge Health, they focus on digital solutions for musculoskeletal issues like back pain, knee pain. They went public, raised over $400 million, pricing at $32 a share. That gave them initial market cap over $2 billion.
Solid debut. But the sources mentioned their valuation was higher in the private markets earlier.
It was, back in the peak of 2021. But the CEO's counterpoint, according to the sources, is look at what they've done since then. Revenue has more than quintupled, gross profit dollars are up 10x, and critically, they went from losing $100 million a year to being free cash flow positive for the last 4 quarters with a decent operating margin. So they feel they've held up to our end of the bargain operationally.
Okay, so they delivered on growth and profitability. What exactly does Hinge Health do?
Their big vision is using tech to scale and automate the delivery of care itself. They started with physical therapy, a huge $50 billion market in the US. Their bold claim is they can automate away about 95% of human clinician hours associated with physical therapy.
Wow, 95%. Why is that even necessary? Don't people just go to PT if they need it?
Well, that's the issue. The sources state that while maybe 40% of Americans have some kind of musculoskeletal condition each year, sprained ankle, chronic back pain, whatever, only about 9% actually end up seeing a physical therapist.
Why is such a huge gap?
The primary reason cited is sheer inconvenience. Traditional PT often means taking 2 to 3 days off work each week for appointments, plus the copay, maybe a parking fee. It's just a hassle for many people to stick with it.
So Hinge Health tries to fix that hassle factor. If I have a back pain, what do they offer?
Their whole approach is about improving access, improve convenience, improve personalization, and substantially lower costs through technology. It's typically app-based exercise programs, sometimes using wearable sensors to track movement, often with virtual coaching support, making therapy accessible from home on your own schedule.
A big hurdle for digital health is always getting insurance companies and employers to pay for it. How's Hinge Health done there?
This seems to be a real strength for them based on the sources. They've partnered with 50-plus health plans and pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. That includes reportedly 5 of the top 5 health plans and 3 major PBMs.
And why is that network so important?
Because it makes it much easier for self-insured employers who provide health care for a massive chunk of the U.S. workforce to offer Hinge Health to their employees. The big health plans they already work with have often vetted Hinge, handled contracting, IT security, so employers can just turn on the Hinge benefit relatively easily. They say they've onboarded customers quickly, and now, reportedly 20 million Americans have access through their benefits. But they acknowledge there's still a lot of work to do. There are over 120 million people getting health care via employers, plus millions more on fully insured Medicare Advantage or federal plans. Lots of room to grow, but they feel they have a really good head start and a repeatable motion, especially with large employers.
Okay, almost at the end. Any quick market updates or other tech news snippets from the sources?
Yeah, a couple of quick hits. There's a Google antitrust probe looking into its deal with Character AI. The DOJ is apparently examining the deal structure for potential antitrust violations.
Okay, keeping an eye on that one. What else?
In the EV world, BYD's electric vehicle sales in Europe reportedly overtook Tesla's in April. Described as a watershed moment, highlighting the growing competition Tesla faces there, and quickly on earnings. Snowflake saw revenue growth driven by new AR products. Zoom also got a boost from its AI tools, apparently, though their raised forecast wasn't quite enough to impress investors, according to the sources.
All right, we have covered a ton of ground today, from, digging into the earth for fiber cables and planning massive energy infrastructure for AI.
All the way to the complexities of AI memory, tokenizing stocks, navigating global politics and regulations, and trying to make healthcare more convenient through technology.
It really shows how interconnected everything is becoming. Advances in one area create demands or opportunities in completely different ones.
Absolutely. And so much of it comes back to these fundamental building blocks: infrastructure, energy, regulatory clarity, and ultimately making the tech usable and valuable for people.
Thinking about that massive energy need for AI we discussed with Stargate, it leads to a final thought, maybe something provocative for you, our listeners, to mull over. Given these enormous power requirements for the future of AI, could access to reliable, affordable energy become the ultimate bottleneck? Could that single factor be what determines which countries and which companies truly lead the next wave of innovation? The sources kept hitting that theme. Electrons, energy, infrastructure is destiny.
It's a powerful question. Definitely ties together a lot of what we've unpacked today. Something to watch very closely.
Indeed. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. We really appreciate you joining us as we navigated through these sources.